Theme park vacations are expensive. Honestly, all vacations are expensive. Travel is expensive. Life is expensive. But sometimes some of the things that places like theme parks do feel a little bit like a money grab. So today I'm going to tell you 3 of the top money grabs that I think you'll find at theme parks here in the Orlando area. Yeah, we're not just talking about Disney World. So this is an interesting discussion, one that I've been looking forward to having with you for quite some time now. I had someone comment a question about this the other day, and I was like, oh, we have to get into it, but I really needed to think through my answer. So I did that, and now we're here at Caribbean Beach to talk. It's a great place to wander around, a few nice places to sit, so let's go find one. Also, for those of you who are wondering, maybe you want a place to just wander around and escape the theme parks for a little bit, you know, kind of get out of the crowds for a second. Disney's Caribbean Beach Resort is easily accessible from Hollywood Studios as well as Epcot. You can jump on the Skyliner at either of those 2 locations. From Hollywood Studios, right off the main gate. At Epcot, it's out International Gateway, so between the UK and France. Of course, you could take a Disney bus over this way as well. Just jump on and boom, you're here. This can also be a nice little detour if you're going to be hopping over to Epcot as well. You know, just kind of jump on a bus or jump on the Skyliner, spend some time here, get some food, and then jump on the Skyliner again, and that'll take you to International Gateway, just steps away from Epcot. All right, so I found a spot to pull off. It's one of my favorites here at Caribbean Beach. So you can see it's like a covered area. There are some chairs. Unfortunately, it has been so wet and rainy that the chairs are soaked, and I don't have an extra like face cloth or anything to wipe them off. So we're just gonna crouch down here like this, like we're in the wild. So anyway, I was asked about what in my opinion are the 3 worst money grabs here in Central Florida theme parks. And I spent some time thinking about it, and I'm pretty confident in my choices. But of course, I'm going to share them with you, and I want you to tell me what your thoughts are in the comments down below. But first and foremost, we're starting strong with something that I mentioned the other day. I think it's actually what sparked this question, and that is Epic Universe charging for previews. So for those of you who don't know or don't remember, when Universal first opened, or ahead of when they opened, they offered previews. And these previews were, well, they were kind of rolled out in a weird way. I'm not really going to get into the nitty gritty, but like there was this whole thing where it was like pass holder exclusive, but then I guess since they didn't sell out, they allowed anyone in. So it wasn't great. But the thing that has me listing this as one of the top 3 money grabs at Central Florida theme parks is that these previews, they weren't free, and they weren't steep discounts either. Guests were effectively paying for a day ticket to a theme park so that they could essentially be a guinea pig. And you know, social media was flooded with people saying you should have known better, you should know that it wasn't going to be 100%. And I think that people knew that. You know, they knew that it might not be perfect, but I don't think that people expected that it was going to be a technical rehearsal, which is a term used by Universal to basically say, we're working out the kinks and this is definitely not done yet. And so guests, they bought tickets, they brought their families, only to realize that a number of attractions weren't available. In fact, there were days where there were like no attractions available based on what I saw online. Now, I did not go. I do not have firsthand experience, but I did hear what other people had to say because I was trying to decide if this was something that I wanted to do. And listening to what all of them had to say made something very clear. This was an opportunity for Universal to squeeze out a little bit extra cash from their most diehard fans and from people who were excited about the newest theme park to join the lineup here in not only Universal Orlando, but Central Florida. Now, I can hear some of you tapping away at your keyboards already. Well, Universal is a company, they're a business. Businesses need to make money, and you're absolutely right. But there are right ways and wrong ways to go about doing that. There are also ways that you can do that that will serve you as a company, and ways that you can do that will isolate your most dedicated fans, making them wonder why they're as dedicated as they are. And in this case, I think that Universal went with the latter. Now, I'm all about offering solutions. Here's what I would have done if I was Universal. And forgive me if I sound like a broken record, because I know I've mentioned this before. I would have leveraged my annual pass holders, offering them up the opportunity to go to Epic Universe free of charge. It's just a perk for your annual pass, so that I, as Universal, could do what I aimed to do. Get bodies in seats, get numbers in the park, and see how it worked out. What does this look like when you actually put people in these spaces and let them go with the flow. Does the flow work? Doing something like this is very standard. It's exactly what you need to do in order to open up your park and have that run go successfully. And if you do this at no charge to the guests, what you get is a lot less negative press, a lot less people going, this really didn't feel like it was worth $150, and a lot more people going, oh my God, that was awesome. It wasn't perfect, but they're not even open yet, and I did get to go experience this for free and help them work out the kinks and be part of making this happen. And it's not like you wouldn't make any money, because guests would still be at the park buying things like food and merchandise. But you know, as I'll probably also say multiple times today, this is what happens when you're focused a little bit too much on the bottom line and a little less on your fan base, more specifically that really dedicated fan base and those people that you're trying to cultivate into the type of fan that will return year after year, ultimately accomplishing what Universal said they set out to accomplish with Epic Universe, turning the Universal Orlando Resort into a week-long vacation destination. Now, I could go on and on talking about how I think that Universal is doing other things that seem like a money grab to me with Epic. I'm not going to get into that because we could be sitting here talking all day, and that's not what this video is about. We have two other topics or two other points to get to. But I will wrap this up by saying that I don't think guests are as blind to this as Universal executives or whoever is making these decisions think that they are. I honestly don't think that guests are blind to any of the things we're going to talk about today, but we'll get there when we get there, you know? For now, though, let's go find another spot. Maybe wander this direction, see what we can stumble into. We made it to the playground. It's like just a few steps across the path from where we were a second ago. Normally I don't come back here because it's usually filled with children, but today, I guess because it's kind of early and kind of soggy over there, it's completely empty. So I figure we'll just sit here for a second. For number 2 on our list, we're making our way right here to the Walt Disney World Resort, and that is Lightning Lane Multi-Pass, while Lightning Lane Premier Pass is a thing. Now, this is kind of a big one. There's a lot of detail here that we need to get into so you can understand why I think that this is a money grab. We're going to have to kind of take a step back and explain what these two things are. Also, if you're going to be planning a trip to the Walt Disney World Resort or you're going to be visiting soon, this might be a good one to stick in there with me for. It's a lot, so hang on tight, but still. So Walt Disney World used to have this thing called Fast Pass. It was this free service where you could basically get a return time for attractions, right? 2020 rolls around, they get rid of that. They implement Genie Plus. This was essentially Fast Pass, but you had to pay for it. And it wasn't that expensive. I think it was like $15 to $30 a day, depending on the day. They, you know, like there's history here. I'm not getting into it. But eventually, Disney decided to go the route of introducing something called Lightning Lane Premier Pass. Now, I am skipping some steps along the way, but essentially, Lightning Lane Premier Pass was Disney's answer to fans who were sick of sitting on their phones constantly when visiting the Walt Disney World Resort. One price, you could ride all the attractions at whatever park that offered a lightning lane without having to schedule your time, do any of that. You just got in line and went. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the way that it's done over in places like Universal, this will sound a lot like Express Pass, and that's because it is. Now, whether you love it or hate it, Lightning Lane Premier Pass does answer a lot of questions. It responds to a lot of concerns, a lot of frustrations that some guests have had, but it also adds some more to that list. One being that it's very expensive, at least compared to what Disney was offering previously, though to be fair, it's not that expensive when you put it up against other theme parks, skip the line services that they offer. Yeah, even Magic Kingdom, which is like wildly expensive, when we look at like the price per ride, like we can crack into the numbers, but I'm not going to because I don't feel like it today, okay? I'm sure that you don't feel like it either, except for one of you. There's at least one of you who really likes to dig into the numbers. And you know what? I like to dig into them too, if I'm being honest, but I've already done this. And there are so many other things that I need to do with my time. And plus, I don't even have a whiteboard over here. Anyway, this service, even if you don't like the idea of paying that much for it, it's actually kind of great because you just buy it and go. But The problem and why this makes it onto the list is not because of how expensive Lightning Lane Premier Pass is, but because while this is still in place, Disney is still offering Lightning Lane Multi-Pass, which is essentially an updated version of Genie Plus. Like I said, there's a lot of detail here, there's a lot of history, we're not getting into all of it. And that pass, Lightning Lane Multi-Pass, I think it's still like $20, $30 a day, give or take. I'm sure it goes up and of course changes depending on what time of year and what park we're talking about. But the availability is terrible, making it so that you ultimately can't really get on the attractions that you really need a Lightning Lane for. Also, I say need very loosely there. Big old air quotes. So anyway, what ultimately ends up happening is you have all these families who do in fact purchase the more expensive Lightning Lane Premier Pass, right? And they can just walk on whatever attraction whenever they'd like. You also have all of these families who feel pressured into buying Lightning Lane Multi-Pass because number one, they've heard the horror stories about how crowded Walt Disney World is. They've also heard many people doing this type of thing say, it's a need, it's a need, it's a need. You have to get it. You can't do Disney without it. Oh my God, have you seen that video where people are like, I might be poor, but I'm not 120 minutes poor? That's the kind of high school bullying BS that people are doing that make people who feel that FOMO and that peer pressure feel like they need to spend the $20, $30, $40 per person per day on multi-pass only to get on 2 attractions, maybe, some of which they could have just walked on. Having that as something that is available isn't actually serving the guest either, because the guests, while they're flipping through their phone looking for the next available Lightning Lane, they're not happy because they don't want to be on their phone and they don't see the need to waste their Lightning Lane on Journey into Imagination with Figment or Living with the Land. So yeah, that makes this, I think you could say more specifically, Lightning Lane Multi-Pass, one of the biggest money grabs here in Central Florida theme parks, at least in my opinion. All right, number 3. This one's going to take some of you by surprise because you're going to go, hold on a second. Really? But yeah, we're talking SeaWorld. Now, I think that this also applies to Busch Gardens and the other theme parks that are part of like the SeaWorld conglomerate. Now, I don't know exactly when it started, but people were really talking about it pretty recently. SeaWorld did this thing where they instituted a 5% service charge on top of various food and other purchases at their parks. And they cited that this was because of rising costs. So rather than doing what a responsible business would do and just raising prices, what they did was fooled all of their guests into thinking that they knew how much something would cost, then of course tacked on that 5% and then of course, tax. Now, I have a lot of issues with this. Again, understanding that businesses are in business to make money and that they need to make money and all of that, right? Like I'm not unaware that that is the case. But again, there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And fooling customers, guests, whatever the case may be, the people who are giving you their money for whatever it is that you're providing, into thinking that they're paying less and then adding additional taxes and fees on the tail end, that's not good business. It doesn't just apply to SeaWorld and their 5% service charge or service fee. This is something that we see all around Florida. I'm sure we see it elsewhere as well, specifically in restaurants. We talked about this a while ago because there was something moving through the political landscape here in Florida. They were trying to make an adjustment to a House bill specifically regarding this. But I didn't want to talk about these service charges specifically, mainly because they're not related to the theme parks outside of this SeaWorld thing. Honestly, I'm a firm believer that, you gotta be upfront with what you're gonna be charging guests. I've said this before. I mentioned this when we were talking about Cake Bake Shop, however long ago, where they upcharged me, didn't make me aware of those upcharges, and I paid $8 or $9 for a coffee, right? It's not okay there, it's not okay anywhere. And the thing that really bothers me about it at SeaWorld is that they double down on responding to people who talk about this. SeaWorld's social media account has responded to this type of thing saying, well, rising costs, Rising costs mean rising prices. Again, not fooling your guests into paying more. And it's just another layer to how complex it can be to just function sometimes, these additional fees that are tacked on. It's difficult if you're on a really tight budget, which I have been in the past, and all of a sudden everything costs 5% more. And that's on the low end. You talk about these restaurants, and it's like you budget to go to a restaurant and you look at the menu, you add the tip, but oh, oops, looks like you have to add 20% on top of that. But it can also be really challenging for international guests as well. Now, I'm not familiar with how things are done in every country around the world, but I know that in a number of places, things like taxes, they're included in the price. So if something is going to cost you $5, it's going to cost you $5. You can literally walk into a store with a $5 note, pay for that $5 item, and have the exact amount of change. So, trying to factor in those additional fees, those additional charges can definitely have an impact. And of course, it does benefit the company. And you might be thinking, well, hold on a second, only a 5% increase isn't a huge increase. And you're right, it's not a huge increase if we're talking about 5% on one item. But when we talk about 5% across like all food sales, that's a 5% increase in income. Not necessarily in profit, because of course, rising costs. But at the end of the day, that spreadsheet is still reflecting that additional 5%. So we have the rollout of Epic Universe, more specifically the Epic Universe previews. We have offering Lightning Lane Multi-Pass as well as Lightning Lane Premier Pass. And finally, we have that 5% service charge over at SeaWorld. But there is a second part to this question. And, the way that this person wrote it, it was difficult for me to, it wasn't difficult for me to understand. I knew what they were asking, but it was difficult for them to communicate. Basically, what they're asking, though, is what are some good ways for these theme parks to make money? What are 3 things that won't hurt the guest, but will still bring in buku bucks for the theme parks? I've got some great suggestions, okay? And before I get into them, I want to be very clear about something, because this type of thing comes up every time I talk about anything business related. I might do this. This might be the thing that I do. But this isn't a reflection of all my job and work experience. I've got over 20 years experience working in various different fields at this point. Now, am I going to sit here and list off a resume to you? Absolutely not, because I work for myself. So take what I have to say or leave it. We're having a conversation here, but keep your whole you don't know what to yourself, okay? Or just leave it in a comment. That definitely does help, but it's not going to impact me in the way I think you think it's going to impact me. So, all right, let's get into it as this storm rolls in. It's not looking good for our Skyliner trip back, by the way. So number one, I think that the theme parks in general need to make better use of what I'm going to describe as the art of the impulse buy. Basically, making it easier for guests to make impulse purchases and giving them less time to think about what it is that they're buying. Now, Universal isn't so bad at this. I find that this is something that is much easier. Universal is an easier place to make impulse purchases than Disney, but Disney has a major problem with this. It can be kind of hard to get your hands on merchandise here at the Walt Disney World Resort, not just because it's popular and sold out, but because it's not always available everywhere, and sometimes it's available in the wrong park. Sometimes they change the location of the merchandise overnight, and then of course popular merchandise tends to not be purchased in quantities that make it available to enough guests, selling out super quickly. And look, to some extent, I totally get it, right? There are certain items that are going to be limited edition. I get that. There are certain items that are going to be limited quantities. They're going to be super special. I get that. The exclusivity is part of that thing, like a pin drop, for example. But it can also be really hard to get your hands on more basic things as well. A great example of this is t-shirts. There'll be this new t-shirt that drops and it's only available in one place and only in one size at that one place. And, maybe they have extra larges over at this particular resort. Having to have guests bop around to get their hands on one thing, especially when you have places like the Emporium and World of Disney, it's not putting enough effort into understanding what guest habits are and understanding how the experience of the theme park is so that more guests can buy the thing, especially when they can buy that thing without thinking too much about it. Because the second that they step away, the second that they go, it's not in my size, it's as good as a lost sale, because they're not necessarily going to go hunt down that item. They might, but not necessarily. To that same point, other things like mobile checkout that can be really confusing, and then sometimes you have to like set things up because you didn't think about doing that ahead of time because you were planning on using cash. Like all of that is another step in the process that has guests backing off on purchases, putting things back that they otherwise would have taken home, and that's lost sales, that's lost money. Also, another thing that I'm gonna include it in impulse purchases because I think it is basically one and the same, is reinstituting something at all of the theme parks. Universal used to do this, Disney used to do this, both of them have discontinued the service, that gets the purchases that guests have made out of their hands so that they can continue to enjoy their day, but more importantly, so that they can think less about how much they've already spent and continue to spend more. Look, no one wants to carry around a bag of stuff all day. Definitely not, right? And especially when we talk about places like Universal where you have to put your stuff in a locker, in a very small locker, by the way, or you have to pay for a full-size locker so that you can ride certain attractions, that's additional fees on top of whatever it is that you spent on merchandise. No one wants to spend that. And if you have to consider that, you have to consider, do I really need that other thing? Do I really need that hiccup helmet? Do I really need that $200 Tronabog statue? What am I going to do with that all day? Those are the types of questions you do not want guests asking, because that second guessing, that means that they're less likely to buy that thing or less likely to buy more things, which is ultimately the goal, right? But yeah, I think that would be a really good way for theme parks to bring in more revenue. Even though some of those things like package delivery would come at a cost to the parks themselves, I think that at the end of the day, there would be a benefit to the parks because guests are under the assumption that this is about benefiting them. Because I mean, it is, but the business is definitely benefiting as well. So number 2 on this list is, well, it's not going to sound great, okay? But I need you to keep in mind that my business brain is on, okay? And if you take a breath, I'm almost positive that some of you are going to agree with me on this one. In fact, you've probably been asking for this. Isolate guests. Make it so easy to stay that even the idea of leaving sounds too ridiculous to consider. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, hold on a second, Kat. How do you do that? How do you achieve that? Well, there are a few simple ways. Disney has shown us that it's possible before, in fact, with, everyone say it together now, the Magical Express. Having something like an airport shuttle that's free and available to guests staying on property, let's say, makes it so that they're less likely to do something like rent a car and less likely to venture to other theme parks. Or honestly, other places in general, you're not going to go to a restaurant off property if it's going to cost you an extra $30 coming and going to get there. You're probably going to eat at a resort restaurant, whether it's in the theme parks or in one of the hotels. Another great way that this could be achieved by Disney or Universal is to do everything in their power to get the Brightline down here, to get some sort of Brightline station at your resort. The Brightline is a train that runs it runs all over the place, but more importantly, it goes to the airport. Now, of course, on a larger scale, this is going to encourage guests to stay on property or, like I mentioned, not visit another theme park, a competitor, spending 4 days with you instead of 2 days with you and then 2 days with them. But I think that this also is something that could be looked at on a smaller scale too. We talked about this the other day with crowding, making the parks themselves easier to, I'm going to use the word enjoy, but, I guess if we're looking at it from more of a business perspective, making it less likely that the guest is going to leave the park. The longer they stay in the park, the more likely they are to spend. Maybe it's on a bottle of water or a Gatorade. Maybe it's at a sit-down meal because it's easier to get into a sit-down restaurant. Maybe we're talking about having more seating available at a table service so guests who can see that they'll be able to sit will buy more food because they know that they're not going to have to juggle it. These are all basic concepts that are implemented in various industries. And the reason that they're implemented in these industries is because they bring in more money. And I do think that if there was more of a focus here as well, it would ultimately, again, not just serve the guest, but it would serve the business in making them more income and ultimately more profit. All right, last but not least, I think that There needs to be more focus on incentivizing guests in meaningful ways that encourage the behavior that they, the company, want to see. You know, everywhere you go, every place that you go with the intent to spend money, whether it's on products or services, every decision you make has been cultivated? Is that the word that I'm looking for? What I'm ultimately trying to say is that companies think about what they want you to do. They think about how much money they want you to spend and how they want you to spend it. And so then they make decisions to hopefully get you to do that. And it's not going to work perfectly every time, but that is the goal. The goal is to get what they want by giving you what you want, even if you didn't know you wanted that. And you know, this can be hard to do, especially with changing habits, changing socioeconomic situations, changing everything. Things change, right? And that's why you have to focus hard on what it is that you want and what the guests need in order to give you what you want. Unfortunately, though, there's been like a lack of effort in this particular area with some companies. Disney's one of them, but they're far from the only place to do this. I'm sure we could find reasons that Universal has done this. Honestly, the previews at Epic is kind of a good example. It's not quite like some of the things that Disney has done, but also I don't have a ton of experience with Universal, as I've said before, so maybe there have been things over the years that have changed and I just am unaware of it. But where I think some companies run into problems, and again, this is not exclusive to Disney, this is not exclusive to theme parks, is that it's almost like they take advantage of the fact that they have the brand recognition and the loyal fan base that they have, but forget how that loyal fan base came to be. And so there's not as much effort to try and continue to cultivate that and continue to grow that loyal fan base and give those fans what they need to continue to spend in the ways that these companies want them to spend. Now, unlike some of the other things that we talked about today, this isn't one that's going to like directly result in buku bucks coming in for the theme parks, but I do think that it will encourage more sales if that's what the aim is. I think it will also encourage, again, those behaviors that are favorable to the bottom line of whatever company we happen to be talking about. But it just seems like, I don't know, the effort just isn't there like it used to be. And I have some theories as to why this is the case, like without droning on forever about it. I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding of the market post-2020 in a number of different areas that make it seem like priorities aren't what they are, and then you know some companies are just running with that without actually making adjustments moving forward, even though the market has adjusted. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I think if there is a little bit more effort in encouraging the behaviors that these companies want to see, it's honestly likely to result in more revenue and happier guests. So everybody wins. But all right, I think that's about it. I am feeling raindrops falling on my head, and I still have some more stuff to do before I leave. So I think I'm gonna run. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. And until next time, stay dry.